Hi, I'm Beth Mcrae, and I am born, Beth Burlingame, and married a man named Cortland McCrae, so thus the surname that I give you this morning. I'm here to talk about this building and the people who have lived in it and the people who live in it now after a fashion, because it's become historical, and that is part of what keeps it going. I'm going to start by saying that the house, because I forget plaques and I don't care for plaques particularly, but it is important that outside this has been named as a federal, it is on the Federal Register, and it was built in 1876, so that makes it in its own right profound. But I want to give a brief overview, and I probably will refer to notes just so that I don't tell it wrong. A friend of mine said years ago, would you give a talk about the house just down the road? It's a Gothic house. And I said, sure, but what if I'm not right? So this is how history comes about. It gets changed in the telling, and we'll try to do it right this morning so that we aren't disturbing the past too much, but it happens. It happens, things change, and as they're told, they change again. History. It began in 1876, and just to my right, the house that still stands and is lived in by Kelly and Bill Fuller today was owned by a man named Peleg Holmes. And Peleg had a daughter, and her name was Alice. And some of you are going to right away say, that's the beginning of how this house got its name. And it is. Now, for some time, I thought that Alice got married in 1876, and the story was told that her father, Peleg, gave her the house as a wedding present. She was marrying a doctor named Nelson Barnes, and it all made sense to me, and I think to everyone else too. But just a short time ago, I found out that no, it didn't really happen that way, that they had been married for 7 years before they came here, Alice and her husband, and they had a daughter named Anna. So you just never know if you've got it right, and I think that's so intriguing that we we get bits and we get pieces, and they come to us at different times. So that is the beginning as we understand it. Unfortunately, I have no picture of Alice, no picture of Anna, and none of Nelson Barnes. But we do know that he had his practice here. We don't exactly know where folks came in. We can surmise, but we're not sure. But he did practice here for some time. In 1903, circa 1903, a man named Lucian Bertelbaugh bought this. Now, I've done a little research, and I know that Alice went to live with her daughter down towards Endicott, Binghamton Way. So she left the area, and so we're not totally sure on the timing here, but we do know in 1903, according to the deeds, that Lucian Bertelbaugh bought the property. And at that time, again, there seems to be women just woven throughout this story. Lucian had a daughter, and her name was Minnie. She was known as Minnie, but everyone remembers her as A.B. Brown's wife. So Alfred B., who we all called A.B. Brown, and we, of course, hear his name even today in the history of Cortland County, all over here and in Cortland. They married, and they moved into the house. So it's another case of a father making the initial move and then people moving it. And A.B., as we know, was a prominent politician, and he was also a great, in every way, I guess. Here we have a picture of him, and I don't think many people have seen this. I'm going to reach down. This is not framed, and it's not a great picture, but we do know that he, at a very young age, was teaching. We're kind of thinking maybe 1902. He was called supervisor, A.B. Brown, and he was teaching over at the academy, which is in the center of town, still stands. It's now a housing for folks to live in. But he taught there at the academy, so early on he was doing things. He married Minnie, and they had, whoa, what is that? Oh, dear. Not as organized as I thought. He married Minnie, and their children came right along, and they are, let me see if I can hold the picture so that people can see a picture of the children. Oh, you try to be organized in your, oh, there you are. Okay, so this is a fairly young version of A.B. Brown. There is Minnie and the children. Up here we have Ruth, and then next to Ruth is Errol, who probably quite a few of us remember who are still living. He lived here later on. And then next to him is Elizabeth. And then if we come down here, we have Marjorie, who we'll be talking about in a bit. And then we have Marlin, H. Marlin here, and then A.B. Brown here. So that's an early photograph of the family. Now, I would like to interject here that we have this photograph of A.B. Brown, which is pretty classic. You know, he always parted his hair in the middle. It's telltale. And I've just seen a photograph of him with some other men, and it's labeled incorrectly. How did I know? His hair, because he always parted it down the middle, any photograph I've seen. But this is a classic photograph of him. And then this is Minnie, a lovely lady. And I will, again, jump around in time a little bit. Her grandson, it would be Marjorie's sons. It would be McKiernan, Steve McKiernan, who is living in Pennsylvania now. He said she was really the hub of the wheel. And everyone remembers everything about A.B. because he did make a splash politically and in every other way. I mean, look at the headline here. A.B. Brown, Cincinnatus, died Saturday. This is, by the way, the Cortland Democrat, dated August 13th, 1943. He was chairman at the erection of the $1 million county courthouse in 1922. So early on, he was playing a large part in what was happening in the county. And again, same photograph, they ran it again, and he was quite something. But Steve McKiernan, Marjorie's son, would have said, oh no, you know, she was the center of it. And he said when he lived, the McKiernans lived in Cortland, they would come over here every Sunday, and she was what made everything work. She baked. I think there was, and Steve hasn't come to show me this, there was a door that is no longer here on the side of it would face the north side of the building. And she would greet them, and they could hardly wait to get here because of her. She was what made everything go round. She was amazing. Of course, she lived on well beyond her husband. And I wanted to refer to, this is one of the few really grand photographs that I have.
And this is Marjorie getting married to Robert. And some of the faces, there he is. There is A.B. Brown. And you can tell that's Minnie. That's Minnie. And some of the old names, Reverend Twilliger, some people will remember that name, Floyd Twilliger. He was sitting at the table. Now, here's someone you might remember if you are as old as I am. This is Marion Knickerbocker, who married Richard Knickerbocker, killed in the war, and she lived just up the road here. And there she is. And when Steve told me, I said, oh, I'm so glad you told me who these people are. So that's Reverend Twilliger. But again, these people lived here and had their being here. So much happened here for such a long time. Even though A.B. died in 1943, Minnie lived on until 1957, and we've already said 5 children. And Errol, I remember, I was born in 52, and I remember Errol living here. Errol died in 1979. He had a son named Bill who lived just across the road where Sharon and George Pryor live now. And they bought the house from Errol. Errol had 2 children who I grew up with, Ricky and Cynthia. And I have a friend who, if we were taking a tour of the house, would say, oh, that's where Cynthia had her bedroom. Well, there was a fire in the house over here, and I'm guessing that that's when Cynthia might have stayed here with Errol. It makes sense. It makes sense. And again, I'm piecing things together as best I can. I think that if you look at literature, and I'm departing from local history here a little bit, I'm going to jump back for just a minute because I think it's important. When I was young, I graduated at 17 from Cincinnatus, and I was one of 2 girls who was summoned to go visit Ruth Rathbun. And Ruth Rathbun lived in the center of town. She'd lived up on the Brackle with her husband Roy, but they had lived most of their lives down here. She was district superintendent of schools for a long stretch, instrumental in Cortland Voices being formed, and a prominent woman. Probably you'd call her a very early, strong feminist. But she summoned 2 of us girls who were about to graduate to come to her home. Well, I don't know about the other girl, my friend Rebecca, but I was scared. I really, a little foreboding there to go into that house. But we went, and when we got there, it seemed awfully dark. I don't remember a lot, except that uneasy I was, and it was dark in the house, as many old houses are. And when we got there, she brought out her jewelry box, and she had each of us pick something, and I still have that. So one of my points here in departing from local history is that when we read books that are written by people like E.M. Forrester, Howard Zend, and we open the book, and in the early pages there's a quote, and E.M. Forrester's quote was, "Only connect." And that makes perfect sense for me and for what is happening through time, that is what we are part of. We can connect with people. We connect with people who are not here anymore. And believe it or not, we probably will be connected with when we are gone. So that's a part of why this works so well, this house, because it had a lot of connections for a lot of people. If you skip ahead in the literature, and this is American literature, George Eliot was writing, and she wrote this Trojan early feminist book called Middlemarch, which has been filmed. A lot of people probably have seen the film, but not gone through the long tome that she wrote. And one of the things that's interesting about her is scholars have said that she was very aware of when she was in the middle of her march. She actually wrote about that Middlemarch had a middle, and she also felt that women were in the middle of their march during her time of writing. So if we had to jump forward into this life here in this house, I think we could say that the A.B. Brown family, they were at the middle. If you open this book called Alice's Dowry or Ada or A.B. Brown's or the Barnes home, you would find A.B. Brown's family at the middle of it. They were here the longest. If you add it up, now they didn't always live here. There were people who rented. Some of you will remember that the Strong family lived here. The Strongs he was the principal. And the Liebers lived here. Various people came, but they did not own the home. They lived here. It was owned for a long time. In fact, when you look at it, from 1920 to 1985, it was still legally the Browns. And Mildred, who was Errol's wife, not Minnie, but Mildred, it's hard to keep all of these things straight, she sold the house to John and Helen Sweeney. And again, I'm kind of on tentative ground here, a little eggshelly, because I don't really have a lot of information about them. They came from Taylor, I'm told, and I'm the kind that scouts around. So I have visited with neighbors, and the neighbors across the way, people look out their windows and they watch their neighbors. And they remember one of the Sweeney boys, I think, had a broken leg. And one of the boys had given him a ride out in the middle of the road. So everyone was agog, watching to see, oh, how's that going to turn out? Now the neighbor behind Ada, I will call her Ada because she's Ada to me, Alice's Dowry of the Arts. Behind Ada, we have another neighbor of long standing, and that would be Jeannie Crandall Steele. She had a son, David. We will have many people will probably remember David. He was a brilliant young man. He played with them, and one day he fell out of a tree back in here. There's a lot of trees on this property. And I think he broke his arm, and Jeannie was working, so someone else ended up taking the child. But again, I think it attests to a family that had boys, and they were busy. They were active, things were happening, and people ended up looking out the window at them and having stories to tell. And the family, I think, is still extant. I don't know them, but they were here from not too long, 85 to 89, to 1989. And then they sold the house to Rich and Lois Kearney. Now the Kearneys, we need to pause. They aren't maybe at the center of the story, but boy, they are quite a chapter. I have not met them. Almost everybody I know adored them. And they all talk about Lois and Rich Kearney and how much they did here. They poured their lives into it. According to my timeline, my chronology, they were here almost 20 years, and they never stopped working. Lois was a retired stewardess, I believe, and I think Rich taught school, and they came here for some time on their weekends and began working on the house. And I'm telling you, there's nothing they didn't touch. Lois's touch, she was an artist, is everywhere. If you walk the property, it's 1.59 acres, so it's for a town place, it's extensive. But if you walk the property, you even notice that the PVC pipe is painted purple to match the house. So everywhere you look, I pulled up carpeting on the back stairs where the servants' quarters are, and underneath, you won't believe, the treads were plainly painted when I pulled up the wool carpet, but the risers were freehand, gorgeous. It's not stenciling, it's freehand work. And if you take a cursory glance, you'll say, oh, she just used a stencil. No, she didn't. It's obvious she didn't. And everything you find that Lois did is artistic. Everywhere you look, she did her own wallpapering. And again, I'm interjecting stories, but the neighbor across the way, Sharon, was very close friends with Lois, and she would come over when I took possession, and she'd say, I helped Lois with those curtains. Well, she said Lois did not like ironing, so I would do the ironing, but Lois made the curtains. Lois probably had help from Rich for the scaffolding for the open stairway, because I don't know how you do that job with such perfection, such beauty, such utter devotion to detail that Lois did without scaffolding. You couldn't have possibly done it. But you even can go in a bathroom and find evidence on a little tiny shelf. You can see Lois's flowers are painted there. And anything you find, you do not touch. It is just too good to ever even think of dismissing, covering. You want it, you want it. The back bedroom was, I think, from what I've been told, where Lois kept many of her art supplies. There's numerous drawers with the old cove pulls on them. And I imagine she did a lot of the painting there. There's sponge painting on those drawers. But this was a woman who put her whole heart into this home. And it shows. It shows. And we don't know exactly where she started. There are no pictures, and I haven't seen her. But my guess is she probably refinished the floors, probably washed them carefully with vinegar and water. And I know that anyone who came here took their shoes off because she was that conscious of keeping things beautiful. I do have a photograph. It is not perfect. It's a newspaper photograph of how it looked, and it was much fuller than it looks now. We have made every effort to keep the space open for programming for the arts. But in her day, Lois had impeccable taste, and the furnishings were everywhere perfect. I cannot say enough about what she did. And the wallpaper snippets that I found in the attic allowed me to repair some places that had been damaged. And I even was able to do a little arty stuff myself in the kitchen, making stencils to go around the pulls on the cupboards where things weren't quite as pristine as they once were when Lois was here. But I would have to say, all things come to an end, and at about 19 years, I think they got tired. That's what I'm told, anyway. They still live in the area, and one of the funniest stories that I heard was from Jody in Jody's Plumbing and Heating. He put in the boiler system here, and he said that when you came here, Lois didn't like it if you couldn't do what she had in mind. So everyone was working towards an end, a vision that she had. So I'm spending a lot of time here, and it's not chronologically the center of the story, but I think it's a marvelous chapter, and one we want to pay homage to throughout time as we see this building move and change. After Lois and Rich, again, my knowledge is scant, but Alan and Mary Adrian bought the home. It continued to be what Rich and Lois intended it to be, a high-end bed and breakfast. And who knows how difficult that was in an area such as ours. We're rural, and trying to make a go of something this magnificent in this area isn't always easy, I'm sure. But they were here from 2008 until 2019 when I came on the scene. The home had been on the market for, I think, 2 years. Maybe I'm stretching it a little, but it had been on the market a long time. And most of my friends felt that I was crazy to contemplate even coming in here in any fashion, whether to live personally or not to. But I was standing in the window of Heritage Hall, and Heritage Hall plays a part in what happens here. I was looking out the window, looking this way, and thinking, I see how this would work. I see how this would dovetail with the Historical Society. So that was the impetus for my movement. Again, I had a friend who said, you need to decide, Beth, whether this is something you want to do and you want to live in this home. And I thought, it doesn't have anything to do with me. It really isn't about me. It's about history and about this town and what we can do and how we can connect with each other. Right back to E.M. Forrester and Howard's End. It is bigger than any one person can possibly be. And that is why I made that step. I visited 5 times. The real estate agent was a child I had in kindergarten, so he probably thought, she's lost it. You know, she doesn't know what she wants. And she didn't. And I kept seeing my husband's face. He was a carpenter, and though he is no longer living, I knew he would not be happy with my decision. But once I made it, after the 5th visit, we hit the floor running. And the first things we did, we tackled the back of the house, which was the neediest. And it is the younger part of the house. The front part was in pretty pristine condition. But as we all know, what goes into the boards that go into an older house, they do work for a long time. It's good lumber. It's probably virgin, a lot of it. And so we're looking at an upright, great boned house, and we really didn't do much here. We did put on a new roof everywhere, all new roofs, even the porches, everything, even the little building out back. And there is, by the way, a playhouse out back. I didn't even mention that there is a carriage house that was enclosed in, I believe, 1905, and it looks like a garage now, but it was a carriage house. And that too is part of the charm of the building. It was the only roof we did not replace. And again, we had great workmen. We had 2 fellows who were working here a lot first year. They did so much, and my hats are off to them. They're just, it's great to have someone who works and you can trust them and you can talk to them, and that's how I felt about these fellows. John Byroads, they're working next door this morning, and they have a great reputation, and he's part of the twosome. And then there's Ricky Yale, who is also always in motion and always trying to get things done here, and for other people too, of course. They spent a lot of time here, and there was water damage in one of the rooms. We had to completely redo the parquet floor in what I call the Taylor room. And then the following year, they came back, and basically they tackled the 3rd floor attic, which is fabulous in design. You just have to come and see it. And we tore out the homosote. They did it. Why am I saying we? That's what homeowners do. They take credit for things that they don't do. And they pulled out the homosote, and under that there were bats, there were bees. They shoveled it out. We put in foam insulation and sheetrock, paint. superb. I mean, the fir floor up there is not like the parquet floor, but it was so lovely. So we could say that. That was great. I think that enough is said probably about what's modern, but we are, everything that happens here, whether it's meetings or storytelling or a drama or a musical production, whatever happens here, the proceeds go to the Historical Society. And I think that's important for everyone to know. This is not a business. It is not a bed and breakfast. However, people can stay here. There are beds, not as many as there were, but there are places for people to stay. And anything that comes of that financially goes directly to the Historical Society, and that's the way we want it, and we will always have it that way. So I think with that said, we looked at an early marriage, and that was Marjorie's, and she married Robert McKiernan, and that was a grand time. And they are actually, I didn't mention this, but they are sitting in that picture. They are actually sitting in the room behind me, 2 rooms behind me. Those are the French doors that are behind me, and that is the early furnishings in what was part and parcel of her life. So we're going to have another marriage here in the next month. Well, actually, yes, late May, early June. We're having another month of a marriage, and that's pretty exciting, because if you go back to that early quote of connecting, I never knew this. Had I known, it would have been doubly exciting to buy the house. But Peleg, if you go back to Peleg Homes, Peleg had a son. He had a daughter named Alice, and he had a son named George. And George, don't have this framed, should have it framed. George married my husband's grandmother's sister. We called her when of course I never knew her, we called her Aunt Setty. She was Lucetta. So she married George Holmes, and they had a daughter named Ruth. And Ruth is the one who gave me the jewelry. So you see, it connects. I would like to hold up a few pictures. This is Ruth in her home, and this is with her cat. So that is Ruth when she was a Holmes, before she married Roy Rathbun. And this is a darling photograph of Ruth with a Cole. Lucetta was a Cole, and Elmira, her sister, who would have been my husband's great-grandmother, was also a Cole. Of course, they were sisters, they were Coles. And this is a cousin Cole, but there's Ruth again. And this time she's got her doll. And then we have a baby picture of Ruth, which is fabulous, just too good not to hang up. Now, we've talked a lot about all the people who have lived here. And then I mentioned early on that there are people who live here now. And they're historical people. The longer I'm here, the more comes through the door, even though you say you're not going to get cluttered. But I want to share with you some of the people who live here and some of the things that lived here, or that live here today. One of them, it's hard to probably zoom in on this, but a friend brought this, and Dennis over at the store at Cincy store here on his lunch hour, he and I, we picked it up and we brought it upstairs. This is a Wheeler and Wilson D9 sewing machine, and it is upstairs. It is a top grade model in excellent condition. Fabulous thing. It was originally crafted by a man who lived in Willett. Get that? I mean, how connected can you get when you find that your neighboring little villages had their beginning with a sewing machine this great? Now, in 1905, this Wheeler and Wilcox machine was bought out by Singer. So we all know Singer, but here's the early runner of one of their machines, and it was a fabulous machine, and were we upstairs, you would dive just to look at it. It's that good. Another one, we looked at that. Another one who's living here now, this would have been my husband's uncle, Irving, with his pony just up on Telephone Road. But again, he's living down here now. And again, he's tied into the family because of the marriage that was made between George and his wife, Lucetta. So he belongs here. He really doesn't belong on the hill as much as I think his early beginnings have a place down here. Curved glass, again, we're keeping everything as historical as we can. And he loved his pony. Reaching here, you wonder, how did she end up here? This is a photograph of Bessie Maybelle Seeley, who lived for many years in the Gothic house over around the corner here, the one that I was talking about earlier, when Gretchen asked me if I'd give a chat, and I said, what if I'm not right? This is the woman who came here, retired here. She lived in Waltham, New York. First woman to graduate from Syracuse. Lots of history here. And she ended her days here, lived to be 100 years old. So she has been ushered by us, by our Historical Society, into the Hall of Fame in Cortland, the Brockway building. So she's pretty special, and this is an earlier photograph. Actually, it's a later photograph with white hair. This is the earlier one. And she was my across the road neighbor, and very important in my life. She financed my graduate school education. So again, how do you get through a town, a life, without pointing to the people who have been interlocked in their support of each other? It's just marvelous. She is yet another interview. We really need to do one over there. That home in itself has so many stories to tell. John. I'm going to step back from John just a little bit because John just came through the door a few days ago. This is Rocky Beckwith's home up in Taylor. And this is my great-grandfather, Fred Freeman. And he's standing, this building still exists. If you were to go straight up to Taylor, you would run right into this building, and it was the post office, and Fred had his store, his dry goods store in here. And here he is talking to the doctor, and doctor's on his wagon with his horses. So that's a story, and again, we're not touring the house, but about a year ago, a cousin of mine in Albany died, and we were asked if we wanted Fred's desk that came out of that store. Did we ever? We went to Albany, my cousin and her son brought it through the door here, and we now have the desk here at Ada for people to see and just soak up the history of what was in Taylor at that time. Now, going back from Fred married Lenora. His wife was named Lenora, and she was a Pudney. So this would be my great-great-grandfather. This is the funniest story, but it's worth telling. Those of us who know Clean and Gracie Potter, they lived for many years here on South Main Street. And Clean was, he was the best plumber around, and there wasn't much that he couldn't do. Anyway, this picture of John preached up at the pond, at Solon Pond, and this hung in the church for many years until it didn't. It came up missing. And Gracie was telling me the story about the fishermen. And if you knew Gracie, she sputtered about it. She was rather heated up about the fishermen came and they were stealing, they were taking things. She said, I don't know what happened to John Pudney, his picture. And I said, well, I can tell you where John is. Because I had John. How did I get John? Well, I don't even know. The story is convoluted. I don't really know all the details. But my father, when he died, had the photograph, but there was no frame. And Gracie was perturbed. It was a gorgeous frame. It was a gorgeous frame. What happened to it? She said, did your father, was he a fisherman? I said, well, no, I fished more than my dad fished off the bridge over here, caught bullheads. But no, my dad wasn't a fisherman, and I don't think he would have taken it. But somehow the frame went missing, whether it was stolen and sold, but somehow Dad found the photograph and kept it. Then when my dad died, my cousin saw the photograph and she said, that's John. That's our great-great-grandfather. And she was cognizant. She knew the history. And I said, why don't you take it home? So she did. And then a week ago, she brought John back with the frame. Now, here's the story. It just gets better. My mother and her sister Iola, who everyone knew as Pat Burlingame, they were the Harrington girls, grew up here. They had gone to New Orleans to visit Pat, Iola's son, Scott. And in doing so, they had their portraits painted. And they had them sent home because they didn't want to carry home extra baggage from New Orleans. And so under here is this gruesome painting of my aunt, which my cousin covered up with John. So the stories just get better. So I was able to tell Gracie the story, and then 2 days ago we hung John in what we call the Taylor room with the desk that belonged to Fred Freeman. So that room's taking on an aura of all its own. It's going to be, I think, devoted to Taylor before we're done. I would like to bring in a couple others. This gal right here with the beautiful braid is Adelaide Fish, aka Betty Crocker. She was went to school in Willett, so we kind of claim her as area history. And by the way, when we say CAHS, we're different from CCHS because we are Cincinnati's area society, historical society, and we claim a lot of ground. So Willett is a part of us, and this photograph came through the door. You never know what's going to come through your door. This came through the door, and I gasped this past winter, and there she is. And this was taken of the girls who were going to school together, and she is a beauty. She obviously is catches your eye. And again, if you're going by what you believe in, this is next to the last story. There is one more after this. This story is probably unusual in that if we talk about Thornton Wilder, again, I'm going to literature because it talks to us. Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town, and he also wrote a one-act play called The Happy Journey to Trenton and Camden. And anyone who graduated from Cincinnati during probably the 50s, 60s, 70s, you might have either seen or been in the play. Some of us will say, oh, I was the mother, I was Beulah. Or I was the child in the one act, or I was the stage manager, because in Thornton Wilder's plays, very often the stage manager will carry the theme through. And I often think of that play because if you've watched Our Town or watched how keenly Thornton Wilder traced the personages, the characters of a place, there's no place to stop. You know, you write a grant for a historical purpose and they'll say, you need to have it wrapped up by such and such a time. Here's the money. Nothing's ever wrapped up. You're never done. And this is an example. It's kind of hard to see. But to my left, that Surrey, which might have been a salesman's sample, we don't know, was brought to me in a box in pieces. We worked before Christmas, this past fall, putting it back together. We worked with incredible people who make a livelihood of restoring things. And the man and wife actually, who put it all back together, they're from the Endicott area. They actually came here. They were so excited to deliver the Surrey back because he knew what it had to have in order to make it whole again. The doll was also in the box, and she has history. If you swing towards these photographs, these are the early pictures of the people who owned the doll before she came here, and the children who played with the doll. So she's an old China head. She's definitely a very fine China head. If you know dolls, you know that this one is a good one. This is a really nice doll. So we refurbished her in silk. We used all vintage things for her, feathers for her hat, and made her, we made her Christmassy this year. And she's back in the Surrey where she was many years ago. This woman who brought the box is living here part of the year, and you might say, well, she's not part of our town. She is. She's part. She's part of it. And she has made herself known by her gift, and we are grateful. Everything that comes here is welcomed. We rarely turn anything down. And okay, I use the euphemism I did buy the house. It is not a not-for-profit. I freely admit I love making my own decisions here. I don't have to be careful about wiggling my left toe, which you do have to be a little careful about when you belong to a society or a not-for-profit organization. So okay, I've got my freedom and I love it. But I think of it as we because it belongs to all of us who are part of this. Last story, not quite. I forgot someone. Going back to Cortland history, I think it's important to know that we live maybe in Cincinnati, but many of us doctored and remember the Higgins doctors. And this is Ed Higgins. This was from the estate of Ed Higgins. And if we were taking the tour, we would find quite a few things that came from the Ed Higgins estate. There's cranberry glass here. There's some beautiful, beautiful tables and chairs. One of the things that the family did not want, and we cannot imagine why, I mean, those of us who are bitten by history, we cannot imagine, but these are the early ancestors of Dr. Ed Higgins, and it was in his home and it was left. So I was helping with the estate sale and I couldn't leave it. So I was one of my purchases, and here it is. It's upstairs in one of the bedrooms, but it's down here. There is this little guy, and then I promise there will only be one more story. This little guy, when John and Ricky were up in the attic and they were pulling out all the bats and the bat stuff and the bees, they found this little guy. Somebody whittled him and he was stuck up in the rafters. So even he has a place here. Who knows who it was who was putting those rafters up and building this house back in the 1870s, but somebody tucked him in. And so he's pretty neat too. One could go on and on. I'm ending on a musical note, and it's right in keeping with the theme of this talk, that this woman, have you ever tried to figure out somebody else's genealogy? Easy. See, people have a feel for their own family, and they try to explain it to you, and you're you're carefully trying to get it and you're trying to write it down, but you make mistakes. And this woman gave something to the family, but it was a long time before I got it because they didn't tell me she wasn't family. She was like family to them, and her picture was in their home. And so I assumed, and I was trying so hard to make it work and make the genealogy work. And I don't know how many times I redid this genealogy family thing. This was a sad story, but a glad story. A 1970 CCS graduate, he and I graduated together, Harry White. He died this past year, and he had contacted our historical society. Would we like the organ that was in his mother's home? And that would have been down on North Main Street, Ruby White. And I was excited, but the society wasn't as excited as I was because they said, we already have a pump organ. We really don't need two. And I tried to find a home for it. And I finally said to Harry, I'm not having any luck. And at that point, I really hadn't thought through this place because even though it eventually came here, I didn't own it at the time that he originally asked the society about having it. So regretfully, I said, we will not be taking it, and I have not found a home for it, and it breaks my heart. And he, well, you had to have known Harry. He had a kind heart. He had not an unkind word to say. Here's his picture. You can tell he's a kind soul. But eventually, when he got sick, I started writing to him, and he was very sick, and his life was cut very short very quickly. But as we wrote, he remembered the organ, and that we had a discussion after I bought Ada. I said, do you still have it? And the house, Ruby's house, had not yet been sold. We were just so lucky that we slipped in. And he said, yes, I still have it. I don't know if the people who bought it are going to want it, if it's part of the sale. He wasn't quite sure of the details. But he contacted them. That was Alan McKee, right next door to Ruby's. And they said, take it. Oh, we didn't wait. We got the fellows from True Value over here, got the big truck, and we loaded it on from Ruby's house, had to take the top off it, and away we went across town holding on to that in a truck. And the fellas brought it in, put it together, rearranged it so it was to their liking, so it was straight. Mark Cobb said, it's not quite right, don't you want me to move it? Whatever. And eventually the family straightened me out on the genealogy. And this is Ruby when she got married. And then you go back a generation, and these are the Ecclestons, the next generation back. And then this is the earliest generation that they have photographs of. So we have this all put together with the pump organ, with the reed organ. And luckily for us, my son, my middle son, is able to repair them. This is what he does for a living. He works on pipe organs, so he can get into this. It works though. We played it at Christmas, and it's very exciting to have the community hear the music. Even though we had COVID champing at our bit, we did open the big doors here in the front of the home, and people were able to hear it. Lynn Cook played it, and the carols that emanated from it were beautiful. It was just wonderful. I didn't mention I did mention the beautiful wedding that's coming, and that would be my daughter. And so you've got a cousin of Alice's, removed, who is going to be married here. And that is what makes everything go round, is that we are all connected. And if we could play this right now, we would. I'd like to end with the closing lines from Thornton Wilder's Happy Journey to Trenton and Camden. And by the way, we did an interview across the street with Mary McKee Shore, and she played the same part I did. But we were separated in years by quite a bit. She graduated in 60 and I graduated in 70. But we could quote them. And the ending of the play is something we could both attest to in our lives. And the lines are, there were 90 and 9, maybe I can sing them, I'm not sure my voice is all that strong, but there were 90 and 9 who safely laid in the shelter of the fold, but one was out on the fields away, far off from the fields of gold. It seems like a good ending, because we do have all kinds of people in our town, and bringing them together is our goal for our historical society and for this building. Thank you. Beth, and they gave this. It's a fantastic piece, absolutely fantastic. So again, you're going a little beyond, but it's Cortland history. And the Mahaneys were King Fairy, but they had this from the time they were married, and then they decided that they wanted to update, and I think Tom reluctantly. It was hard for Tom to do. But that's not stencil. That is Lois's work.
That's unbelievable.
She really is.
Beautiful.
She's just fantastic.
What a beautiful room.
We have meetings in here, and as you can tell, just stepping in, it's warm. And if we are cold, we can, we have the electric insert, which again, probably got put in by Lois. And I've had that all cleaned and checked, so we can use it, which is wonderful. It's just great. There's a couple of these in the house.
This is the original to the house?
As far as I know, it's original. It certainly is period.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing, I asked Alan to leave anything that was history, and as far as I know, he did well. I mean, this is original. That was original. These are fantastic doors. They have screens and, oh my gosh, such quality.
Yeah.
Such beautiful quality.
The workmanship is unbelievable. Every little detail, even the door handles.
This was this little rocker. You wouldn't think it would work. It was a piece given by a lady down the road, and it was black as your hat, and I stripped it except for the rockers. And the piece beside it is my husband made it. It's a shaker reproduction, but it is cherry, solid cherry. He made that.
It was quite
and that is another Dr. Ed's piece from the Higgins estate. The lamp is another. Those are lovely. It was little parlor off here with the fireplace, which is just adorable.
So Lois did that.
Kearns did that. Yeah.
Freehand.
Freehand. And you can see she had the wool, the rugs, and this is later when the second group came in to do the bed and breakfast. This is Al and Mary, Adrian. we always say to them, oh, don't touch, don't touch. But they can come up here and they can touch. Most of this I brought from school because nobody wanted it and I bought it anyway. And we're putting in a library, just bringing books off from my hill house so that people who bring their kids up here, they can sit and read and watch the kids and so on.
Oh, beautiful. And this was an attic?
It was an attic. We kept the original floor, which was really nice.
It's beautiful.
We didn't highly sand it. The fellows just kind of went over it. They did put in the bookshelves. I said, I need bookshelves all the way around, guys. Mm-hmm. She put in this stub wall here. And if we go further back, you'll see that this jogs back because she wanted people, let me show you how she was thinking. She would lock this from the other side, and that meant bed and breakfast people, this is where you stop.
I see.
Because she had her own life
I see.
back here, she and Rich. And so I would take this out. It would be easy to do.
Sure.
Maybe she stayed, but isn't it adorable?
Oh, cute. What a low ceiling.
I know, and look how she did this. I mean, who would have
would've thought?
thought?
I know.
We don't think of things like that, and she did. So we are not touching that. Isn't it cool?
Now that wouldn't be from 1870.
Yeah, I think it's got to be
Really?
along in there somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah, it's old. That is old. And I don't know, how old. If I peel it back, and I don't want to, but you can hear, there's nothing underneath
Right.
except plaster back
Wow.
here. So,
Boy, it's in good condition.
isn't it great?
I guess being in a closet helped it.
Yeah. You see where that piece runs across?
Yes.
That was solid, and the pigeons would poo, and then it would rot up there,
Sure.
and then we would end up
Yeah.
with pieces falling down. And they had spent $20,000 in 1970 something. Actually, I can't remember,
Mhm.
78 or 9, because it fell apart, and they had a steeple company come in, and they was guaranteed for 100 years, but the steeple company's gone. So anyway, we made the decision to go with the PVC, and it looks from a distance.
It's great.
Nobody knows. This is where my real work was. This back part was just awful. It was so awful, and we took load after load after load of stuff out of it. I know. It's just fabulous work. But I painted carefully
Yeah.
around things. And this was where Lois had, I think I referred to drawers.
Oh, yeah, she had her art
Yep.
things stored here. Oh, what a low ceiling.
I didn't mention this. This was my mother's.
Oh.
And we didn't have the rails for it. It's a 3/4 bed, one of those,
Yeah.
And we found some rails, some cherry rails up in the carriage house. So we put it together and said, so this is where I stay.
Yeah.
In this back part, and I can shut off the house and
Sure.
leave one zone on and leave the others at 52. So it works really well. It's a cute little room.
It
and
is.
in here, this darling little thing. I'm gonna put this on so we can see better. This is our this is our archives that we worked on all winter on the hill. And there is our work,
neatly
oversized.
organized.
Well, we think we've got it pretty well corralled. There's still some on the hill that I'm working on. I've got another box and some oversized boxes to bring down. We're leaving them here for now because it's not heated over at Heritage at the church, and there's no way to insulate over there because there's no room between the inside and the outside wall.
So that's a stone foundation.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And it goes from here all the way.
It
through.
looks like it's in good shape, the
I
foundation.
think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is. I don't see any bowing
Yeah,
for
it's-
sure. Yeah.
This cupboard is original to the
Yes,
house.
this is original. I think the door was somewhere in here, but I don't know just where. And if
When it was the
Steele.
doctor's office?
I think at least during the brown. As for the handle. So many wonderful touches.